The nursery door is locked from the inside. My mother-in-law's fingers dig into my arm as she shoves me against the wall, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're too unstable for your own child." My incision burns, my hands shake. But I've got her house keys now. The landline's dead, my phone's gone, and the front door might as well be welded shut. She's not just watching me. She's keeping me. And the only way out is through her. The brass knob resisted Sarah's grip, a cold, unyielding weight against her palm. Inside the nursery, the floorboards groaned under a rhythmic tread. Slow, deliberate paces that stopped whenever Sarah's breath hitched. She pressed her ear to the white-painted wood of the Westchester Colonial, catching the faint, metallic scent of lavender polish and something sharper, like scorched rosemary. It was a smell that had come to define her imprisonment, an oily floral shroud that Evelyn used to mask the sour tang of neglect. Sarah's fingers traced the surgical bandage beneath her shirt, the adhesive pulling painfully against her skin. The incision from her emergency C-section throbbed with a dull, rhythmic heat, a physical reminder of the day her world fractured. She reached for the stopwatch hanging around her neck, her third heartbeat, David called it, and felt the cold plastic. The nursery door remained locked. This was the new reality. Evelyn Miller, the helpful mother-in-law, had transformed from a guest into a warden. Sarah retreated to the kitchen, her slippers silent on the linoleum. On the counter sat the porcelain cup, steam curling in gray ribbons from the dark, amber liquid. The smell hit her throat first, a medicinal sting of crushed valerian and damp earth. It was the tea Evelyn insisted would fix the milk and settle the nerves. But to Sarah, it tasted like copper and betrayal. She pulled a leather-bound ledger from behind the flour canister. Her pen nib scratched against the thick paper, recording the exact shade of the infusion. Burnt sienna. She noted the oily film shimmering on the surface and the gritty residue settling at the bottom. Her handwriting was shaky, but the data was precise. She logged the time, 8:14 a.m., and the physical symptoms that followed every dose. The tingling in her fingertips, the way the kitchen floor seemed to tilt like the deck of a ship, the heavy, leaden weight in her lungs. She was a physical therapist. She knew how bodies were supposed to move, and her own was being sabotaged. The floorboards above her creaked. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, descending with a slow, predatory grace. Sarah slid the ledger into its hiding place as Evelyn appeared in the archway, smoothing her silk apron. Evelyn's silver hair was perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place despite the early hour. "Drink up, Sarah," Evelyn said, her voice like honey-coated gravel. She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes unblinking. "It's for the nerves. You've been so restless lately, and we don't want the milk to sour in your chest, do we?" Sarah lifted the cup, the heat seeping into her skin. The liquid trembled. She watched Evelyn's reflection in the window, a gray silhouette waiting for the first swallow. Sarah tilted the rim to her lips, letting the bitter steam fill her lungs, while her thumb traced the hidden edge of the notebook. She didn't drink. She let the liquid pool in her mouth, waiting for Evelyn to turn away so she could spit it into the sink. But Evelyn didn't move. The older woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a vintage silver pillbox. Clack. The sound was sharp, a metallic snap that signaled the start of a new lie. Evelyn swallowed a small white sugar pill, her heart medicine, and smiled. "David is nearly ready for the city," Evelyn murmured. "He has that big deposition today. He shouldn't be worried about things at home, Sarah. He needs a clear head." The front door opened, and David stepped into the hallway, adjusting his silk tie. He did it 3 times, a rhythmic, obsessive tug that Sarah knew meant he was retreating into his objective shell. David is checking his briefcase, he whispered to himself, his voice a low, rhythmic mumble. David is making sure he has the Peterson file. Sarah moved toward him, her gait unsteady. David, I need you to stay. Just for an hour. I need to hold Leo. Evelyn appeared behind Sarah, her hand landing on Sarah's shoulder. The grip was surprisingly strong, fingers digging into the muscle. Now, darling, we talked about this. You're still so weak. The doctor said rest is the only way the incision will heal. I'm fine. Sarah snapped, her voice cracking. She looked at David, pleading with her eyes. David, tell her. Tell her I can hold my own son. David didn't look up from his briefcase. David is focusing on the schedule. David is avoiding the drama. He straightened his tie for the 4th time. Sarah, Mom is just trying to help. You look tired. Your eyes are bloodshot. It's the tea. Sarah wanted to scream, but the words felt like they were made of sand. Evelyn moved past her, heading toward the stairs where the baby had begun to cry. A high-pitched, cat-like wail that tore through the house. I'll go get the little prince, Evelyn said. You stay here and finish your breakfast. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't let it happen again. She couldn't let another 5 minutes pass with Leo in those predatory arms. She followed Evelyn into the hallway, her legs feeling like they were moving through deep water. Give him to me, Sarah demanded as Evelyn descended the stairs with Leo nestled against her shoulder. The baby was clutching a scrap of red flannel, his small face red with effort. The rhythmic shuck-shuck of him sucking on the cloth was the only sound in the sudden silence of the hall. Sarah, you're shaking, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a soothing, dangerous whisper. You might drop him. Remember what happened at the clinic? 1 minute of inattention and that poor man's hip shattered? We don't want a repeat of that, do we? The mention of the accident was a physical blow. Sarah flinched, but she didn't back down. She reached out, her fingers brushing the soft wool of Leo's blanket. He is mine. Give him back. She lunged, her hands grasping for the child. For a second, she felt the warmth of Leo's body, the familiar scent of baby powder and milk. But Evelyn didn't yield. She pivoted with a speed that belied her age, her shoulders slamming into Sarah's chest. Sarah gasped as the impact vibrated through her surgical site. A flash of white-hot pain blinded her. She felt herself being pushed, not by a grandmother's touch, but by a cold, calculated force. Her back hit the wall with a thud that rattled the framed photos of the Westchester estate. David! Sarah choked out. David stood by the door, his hand on the knob. He looked at them, his mother holding the crying baby, his wife slumped against the wall, gasping for air. David is leaving now, he whispered, his eyes darting away. David is going to be late for the train. He stepped out and closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like a gavel. Subverted. Sarah leaned against the wallpaper, her breath coming in ragged hitches. The pain in her abdomen was a dull roar, but her mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Evelyn was standing 3 feet away, adjusting Leo's blanket, her face a mask of practiced concern. You see, Sarah? You're simply too unstable. Evelyn sighed. Look at you. You can barely stand. It's the postpartum psychosis. It's a tragedy, really. Evelyn turned to place Leo in the playpen in the living room. As she moved, the heavy ring of house keys dangling from her apron pocket jingled. A bright, metallic sound. Sarah saw her chance. She didn't think about the pain. She didn't think about the weakness in her knees. She used the wall for leverage and lunged forward, not for the baby this time, but for the keys. Her fingers closed around the cold brass. She felt the jagged edges of the teeth, the weight of the heavy fob. With a sharp tug, she ripped them free. Evelyn spun around, her eyes widening, but Sarah was already retreating toward the kitchen. She felt a surge of pure electric triumph. She had them. The keys to the front door, the back door, the garage, and the nursery. She had the power to leave. She had the means to take Leo and drive until the Westchester trees were a distant memory. She could feel the weight of the keys in her palm, a solid, undeniable victory. She would wait until Evelyn went upstairs to change Leo, and then she would run. "You shouldn't have done that, Sarah," Evelyn said. Her voice wasn't soothing anymore. It was flat, cold. "I'm leaving, Evelyn," Sarah panted, clutching the keys to her chest. "I'm taking my son, and we are going to my mother's. David can choose to follow us or stay here with you. But I am done." Evelyn didn't move to stop her. She didn't scream. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out her silver pill box. Clack. She took a pill, chewed it slowly, and looked at the clock on the wall. "You think those keys are your salvation? You think a piece of metal changes the fact that you can't even walk straight?" Sarah ignored her. She stumbled into the kitchen, her mind already racing through the logistics. She needed her phone. She needed to call her sister, to tell her to meet them halfway. She reached for the charging station on the counter where her iPhone usually sat. The cord was there, snaking across the granite. But the end was empty. Sarah's heart skipped. She checked the drawers, the fruit bowl, the space behind the toaster. Nothing. She looked at the wall where the landline hung. The cord was dangling, the copper wires exposed and frayed, severed cleanly by a pair of kitchen shears. She turned back to the hallway, her hand trembling as she tried to find the right key for the back door. Her vision began to blur. The edges of the room started to fray, the white cabinets bleeding into the gray floor. "The keys don't matter if you can't find the door, darling." Evelyn's voice drifted in from the hallway. Sarah looked down at her hand. The keys were there, but she couldn't remember which one was which. They all looked the same. Blurry, silver shapes that seemed to be melting. The win of swiping the keys had been a trap. Evelyn hadn't fought to keep them because she knew the tea had already done its work. The keys weren't a way out. They were a cruel joke, a weight to carry while Sarah's nervous system began to shut down. The room tilted violently. Sarah reached for the counter, but her fingers slid off the smooth surface. She realized with a jolt of pure terror that Evelyn hadn't just been drugging the tea. She had been escalating. The physical struggle hadn't been about the baby. It had been a distraction to ensure Sarah didn't notice the missing phone, the cut wire. Sarah fell to her knees, the keys clattering onto the linoleum. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. She tried to crawl toward the door, but her limbs felt like they were made of lead. "Time for your nap, Sarah," Evelyn whispered, appearing in the doorway. She wasn't holding the baby anymore. She was holding a heavy brass candle holder from the dining room table. Outside, the first rumble of thunder shook the house. The sky turned a bruised, sickly purple. The autumn storm was arriving, and Sarah Miller was locked inside with a woman who had no intention of ever letting her go. The power died with a sharp, electric pop. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the soft whir of the ventilation, all of it vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt physical. Sarah lay on the kitchen floor, her cheek pressed against the cold tile. The only light came from the jagged flashes of lightning that illuminated the room in strobing, skeletal bursts. She tried to push herself up, but the sedative was a thick, dark tide pulling her under. Her brain felt like it was wrapped in wet wool. Focus, she told herself. 300 seconds. I've been down for 60. Leo is alone. She dragged herself toward the living room, her fingers clawing at the rug. The air smelled of ozone and the cloying, artificial lavender of Evelyn's cleaning supplies. As she reached the archway, a flash of lightning revealed the wall of family photos. Sarah gasped. Every frame that had once held her face, her wedding photo, the picture of her holding Leo in the hospital, the candid shot David took in the park, had been turned face down. Only the photos of David and Evelyn remained upright, their frozen smiles mocking her from the shadows. She kept moving, her breath coming in shallow whines. She reached the front door, hoping against hope that she could somehow find the strength to turn the deadbolt. But there, sitting on the polished hardwood, was her blue Samsonite suitcase. She reached out and unzipped it. Inside were her clothes, packed neatly, but they were ruined. Every shirt, every pair of pants had been slashed with a razor, the fabric hanging in ribbons. It was a message. You are leaving, but you are leaving as nothing. Going somewhere, Sarah? Evelyn was standing in the mudroom, the brass candle holder glinting in her hand. She looked like a ghost in the darkness, her silver hair shimmering with every flash of lightning. Let me go, Sarah managed to croak. I can't do that. You're a danger to yourself, a danger to the boy. Evelyn stepped forward, her footsteps heavy and deliberate. Sarah tried to scramble toward the garage door, her last hope of escape. If she could just get to the car, she could smash the garage door open. She reached the narrow passage of the mudroom, her fingers brushing the handle. But Evelyn was faster. She swung the candle holder. The heavy metal caught Sarah across the temple. There was no pain at first, only a sudden, sickening vibration that rattled her teeth. The world spun. The floor disappeared. Sarah felt herself falling, her body tumbling over the edge of the basement stairs. She hit the wooden steps with a series of dull thuds, her shoulder barking against the railing, her hips slamming into the treads. She landed at the bottom in a heap, her lungs burning as she fought for air. The basement was cold and smelled of damp earth and old paper. Sarah lay there, her head throbbing. Her hand brushed against something hard, the leg of an old wooden desk David's father had left behind. She reached up, her fingers finding a drawer that was slightly ajar. Inside, she felt the crinkle of paper. She pulled it out, her eyes straining to read in the dim light of a small, battery-operated emergency lantern that had sat on the workbench nearby. It was a medical file. Her name was at the top, Sarah Miller. Diagnosis: severe postpartum psychosis with violent tendencies. She flipped through the pages. There were her signatures, perfect flowing recreations of her handwriting, on documents requesting voluntary commitment to the Silver Oaks Psychiatric Institute. There were logs of incidents she never committed. Patient attempted to drown infant in bath. Patient threatened mother-in-law with kitchen knife. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Evelyn wasn't just trying to drive her away. She was building a paper trail to erase her. Above her, the basement door creaked. David will be so sad to hear you fell, Sarah. Evelyn's voice drifted down the stairs. But he'll understand. He knows you haven't been yourself. The heavy iron bolt slid into place. Clack shink. Sarah was buried alive. The darkness in the basement felt like a living thing, pressing against her skin. Sarah sat on the cold concrete floor, her head resting against the desk. Her temple was sticky with blood, and the sedative was still pulsing through her veins, making the shadows on the wall dance and stretch into monstrous shapes. She looked at the file again. Evelyn had planned everything. The vitamins, the tea, the isolation. It was all designed to make the forged documents look like the only logical conclusion. If David saw these, with Sarah's signature on the bottom, he wouldn't even question it. He would see it as a legal fact, an objective truth to be managed. "David is signing the papers," she whispered, mimicking his voice. "David is doing what's best for the family." The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system, cutting through the haze of the drugs. She couldn't stay here. She looked around the basement. It was a graveyard of old memories. Broken furniture, boxes of David's childhood toys, and a heavy workbench covered in rusted tools. Near the back wall, she saw it. A heavy metal crowbar, leaning against a stack of winter tires. She dragged herself toward it, her muscles screaming. She gripped the cold iron, the weight of it grounding her. She stumbled back to the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The door was solid oak, but the frame was old. She jammed the flat end of the crowbar into the gap between the door and the jamb, right where the bolt met the wood. She threw her weight against it. The wood groaned. Sarah's incision flared with white-hot pain, a sensation like a serrated knife being drawn across her stomach. She ignored it. She pushed again. Crack. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the basement. She repositioned the bar and gave one final, desperate shove. The bolt gave way, the metal screaming as it was ripped from the frame. The door swung open. Sarah tumbled into the hallway, the air of the main house feeling strangely warm compared to the cellar. The hallucinations hit her then. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles, the walls bowing inward as if the house were breathing. The floral wallpaper turned into a sea of reaching hands. She blinked, her head swimming. "Not real," she muttered. "The tea, the chemicals. Not real." She crawled toward David's office. She needed a way to get to Leo. The nursery door was locked, and Evelyn had the keys she'd stolen back. But David was a man of patterns. He kept spares of everything. She reached the mahogany desk and began pulling out drawers, throwing files and pens onto the floor. She found it tucked inside a hollowed-out book on the bottom shelf. A small silver key with a blue ribbon. She gripped it so hard the metal bit into her palm. She made it to the top of the stairs, her vision flickering like a dying light bulb. The nursery was only 20 feet away. She could hear Leo crying, not the rhythmic sucking sound now, but a frantic, gasping sob. "I'm coming, Leo," she whispered. She reached the door and fumbled for the lock. But before the key could touch the metal, a hand clamped onto her wrist. Evelyn was there. She hadn't heard the door break. She had been waiting. "You're very persistent, Sarah. I'll give you that," Evelyn said. Her face was calm, almost bored. She didn't use the candle holder this time. She reached out with her free hand and pressed 2 fingers into the side of Sarah's neck, just below the jawline. Sarah tried to scream, but the air died in her throat. A spike of agonizing, electric pain shot through her entire body. It was as if her nervous system had been short-circuited. Her muscles turned to water. Her fingers opened, and the silver key clattered to the floor. She collapsed, her body hitting the carpet with a soft thud. She was awake, her eyes wide, but she couldn't move a finger. She was a passenger in her own skin, paralyzed by the specialized pressure point Evelyn had learned in her years of caring for the sick. Evelyn looked down at her, a small, sad smile on her lips. "You should have stayed in the basement, dear. It would have been much cleaner." Evelyn turned and pushed the nursery door open. Through the crack, Sarah watched, helpless, as the nightmare reached its peak. Evelyn walked to the crib and picked up Leo. She began to hum, a low, discordant tune that sounded like a distorted lullaby. She sat in the rocking chair and began to unbutton her silk blouse. "There, there, my little love," Evelyn crooned. "The incubator is broken, but Mommy's here now. Mommy's always been here." Sarah watched in silent, paralyzed horror as Evelyn, stripped to the waist, pressed the infant to her dry, withered breast. "You were just a vessel, Sarah," Evelyn whispered, looking at the door. "A biological necessity. But the bond is mine." The storm outside broke into a torrential downpour, the rain lashing against the windows like 1,000 fists. Sarah lay on the floor, a single tear tracking down her temple, watching her life being stolen by a woman who had replaced reality with a ghost. The paralysis was a heavy, suffocating blanket, but Sarah's mind was a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Think. You're a therapist. You know the nerves. The pressure was on the carotid sinus and the brachial plexus. The signal is blocked, not severed. Asterisk. She focused every ounce of her will on her right hand. Twitch. Just a twitch. Inside the nursery, Evelyn was still chanting, her voice a rhythmic drone. A do-over. A perfect quiet boy. No more silence in the halls. No more empty rooms. Sarah felt a spark of heat in her thumb. It was a tiny, microscopic movement, but it was a start. She began to breathe in a specific pattern, slow, deep, diaphragmatic breaths, trying to force oxygen into her blood, to flush out the lingering sedatives. She heard Evelyn stand up. The rocking chair creaked. "Time to go, Leo," Evelyn said. "We're going to the cabin, the one by the lake. No one will look for us there. Not even David. Especially not David." The thought of Evelyn taking her son into the wilderness, into a place where Sarah could never find them, acted like a shot of adrenaline. The paralysis shattered. Sarah lunged. It wasn't a graceful movement. It was a desperate, primal heave. She threw herself through the doorway, her shoulder catching Evelyn in the backs of her knees. Evelyn let out a sharp cry as she buckled, Leo slipping from her arms. Sarah caught him midair, her surgical incision screaming as the weight of the baby tore at her stitches. She didn't stop. She scrambled toward the hallway, her legs shaking, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ducked into the master bathroom and slammed the door, sliding the heavy brass bolt into place just as Evelyn's weight hit the wood from the other side. "Open the door, Sarah!" Evelyn screamed. The honey was gone. The gravel was all that remained. "He's mine. You're sick. You're a crazy woman who broke out of the basement." Sarah sat on the cold tile floor, clutching Leo to her chest. The baby was screaming, but it was a healthy, loud sound. She checked him. No bruises, no marks. He reached for her, his small fingers finding the red flannel scrap still tucked in his blanket. The rhythmic shuck-shuck began again, a tiny anchor in the storm. "You're okay?" Sarah whispered, her tears falling onto his hair. "I've got you. 300 seconds. I'm never letting go again." She heard the front door downstairs crash open. "David!" she screamed. "In the bathroom! Get the police!" The door to the bathroom shuddered under Evelyn's blows. "David? David, help me! She's hurt the baby. She's lost her mind." A few minutes later, the bathroom door was silent. Sarah heard the heavy, creaking tread of boots, the sound of Officer Wilson's utility belt. She heard the low, tuneless humming of the battle hymn of the Republic. "Mrs. Miller?" Wilson's voice was deep, authoritative. "It's the police. You can come out now." Sarah stood up, her legs like jelly. She opened the door. The hallway was a scene of chaos. Evelyn was being led away in handcuffs, her silk blouse still half unbuttoned, her silver hair a wild halo around her head. She was screaming about the incubator and the lake, her eyes wide and glassy. David stood by the nursery door, his face ashen. He looked at Sarah, then at the baby, then at the police. David is confused, he whispered, his hand trembling as he reached for his tie. Subverted. Sarah walked past him into the nursery, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't want his comfort. She didn't want his objective analysis. "Look at this, David," she said, her voice cold and hard as flint. She threw the medical file she'd found in the basement onto the changing table. Beside it, she placed 2 orange pill bottles she'd snatched from Evelyn's apron during the struggle. David picked up the bottles, his brow furrowed. This is my prescription, my Xanax. Why did Mom have this?" "She wasn't just giving me tea, David," Sarah said. "She was stealing your medication to drug me. She was forging my name on commitment papers. She was going to have me locked away so she could take Leo." David flipped through the file, his eyes scanning the incidents and the psychiatric reports. He stopped at the last page, the one with Sarah's forged signature. I thought you were just stressed," David stammered. Dr. Thompson said the labs showed high levels of sedatives, but he thought you were taking them yourself. He showed me the logs." "The logs Evelyn wrote," Sarah snapped. "The labs she tampered with. And you believed her. You watched her shove me against a wall, and you walked out the door because it was easier than facing the truth." David reached out to touch her arm. "Sarah, honey, I was just trying to keep the peace. I didn't know she was capable of—" Sarah stepped back, the movement sharp and final. "You didn't know because you chose not to know. You cross-examined me like a witness instead of protecting me like a husband. You let a predator into our house and called it help." She looked at him. The rumpled suit, the nervous twitch of his fingers, the way he couldn't even meet her eyes. She realized in that moment that the man she had married was gone, or perhaps he had never really existed. The objective lawyer was just a coward in a silk tie. "I can't do this, David," she said. "What do you mean?" "She's gone. The police have her. We can get back to normal." "There is no normal," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "I looked at the lock on the basement door, David. It was bolted from the outside. You walked past that door every day for a week. You didn't see it because you didn't want to see it." She picked up Leo and walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" David called out, his voice rising in panic. David is asking where you're going." "I'm going to a place where the doors don't have bolts," Sarah said without looking back. The expected reconciliation, the moment where the husband saves the day and the family unites against the villain, was a hollow shell. The evidence hadn't just convicted Evelyn, it had indicted David. As Sarah walked out of the Westchester house, she knew she wasn't just leaving a crime scene. She was leaving a ghost. 6 months later, the sun in California felt different, sharper, cleaner, without the oily weight of the East Coast humidity. Sarah stood on the balcony of her new home in Santa Monica, watching the Pacific tide thump against the shore. The sound was rhythmic, like a heavy wooden door being pounded, but it no longer made her heart race. She looked through the glass door into the living room. David was there, sitting on the floor with Leo. He had followed them, eventually. He had begged for a second chance, had gone to therapy, had finally stopped narrating his life in the third person. He was trying. But as Sarah watched him stack blocks for their son, her hand instinctively went to the new security panel by the door. She checked the lights, all green. She checked the deadbolts, all engaged. She looked down at the stopwatch still hanging around her neck. She didn't use it as much now, but the weight of it was a comfort. It was a reminder that vigilance wasn't a phase. It was a price. The immediate threat of Evelyn was gone. The woman was locked in a high-security psychiatric ward in upstate New York, her letters intercepted and burned by David's legal team. But the scar on Sarah's abdomen still itched when it rained, and she still couldn't drink tea without tasting copper. She looked out at the beach. A man in a heavy wool coat was walking along the shoreline, his head down against the wind. It was the same distinctive coat David had lost in the Westchester snow. Sarah's breath hitched. She blinked, and the man was gone, lost in the glare of the sun. She knew it was a phantom. She knew she was safe. But as she stepped back inside and locked the balcony door, she accepted the bittersweet truth of her survival. The mystery of the poisoned milk was solved, but the world would never be quiet again. Every creak of a floorboard, every helpful smile from a stranger, every rhythmic clack of a pillbox would always be a signal. She was a healer who had saved herself, but the cost was the permanent loss of the ease she once had. She walked over to David and Leo, sitting on the floor between them. She held her son close, her eyes never leaving the door. The victory was hers. But the Westchester house would always be there, a gray silhouette in the back of her mind, waiting for the lights to fail.